It doesn't begin with a decision. It begins with something much smaller than that. Something quiet. Something that doesn't look important at the time. Most people can't point to the exact moment their life began to move in a direction they never consciously chose. Because nothing dramatic happened. Nothing obvious. Nothing that would make them stop and say, "This is where everything changes." It just felt like another normal day, another normal week, another normal version of themselves. And that's why it goes unnoticed. Because change rarely announces itself. It blends into routine. It hides inside repetition. It disguises itself as normal. And people trust normal, even when normal is slowly moving them somewhere they never meant to go. Most days don't feel important. They feel interchangeable. You wake up at roughly the same time. You follow roughly the same sequence. You respond to the same kinds of responsibilities. You return to the same distractions. You tell yourself the same explanations for why things are the way they are. Nothing feels permanent. It all feels temporary, even when it isn't. People tell themselves they're just passing through this phase, that this version of their life isn't the final version, that eventually something will shift. Eventually, they'll feel different. Eventually, they'll become someone else. But eventually is a quiet word. Eventually doesn't demand action. Eventually doesn't create urgency. Eventually allows delay to feel harmless. So days continue. Weeks continue. Months continue. And each day feels small enough to ignore. Each choice feels small enough to justify. Each delay feels small enough to forgive. Nothing feels significant in isolation. But isolation is an illusion. Because repetition connects everything. Repetition builds patterns, and patterns build identity. Not suddenly, not intentionally, just consistently. There is a pattern that forms when people stop questioning the direction of their own movement, not because they've consciously accepted it, but because they've stopped consciously observing it. This pattern is quiet avoidance, not avoidance of effort, but avoidance of awareness. Awareness requires honesty. Honesty requires discomfort. Discomfort requires responsibility. And responsibility forces people to admit that nothing outside them has been steering their life. It's been their own unexamined patterns, their own unchallenged routines, their own unconscious acceptance of whatever felt easiest to continue. Avoidance doesn't look dramatic. It looks ordinary. It looks like another day lived without interruption. The consequences don't appear all at once. They appear gradually, subtly, almost invisibly. At first, it's just a feeling, a quiet sense that something feels different. Not wrong, just unfamiliar. You begin to feel slightly disconnected from the person you thought you were becoming, slightly distant from the version of yourself you once imagined. But the feeling isn't strong enough to interrupt anything. So nothing changes. Time continues. And time has a way of reinforcing whatever direction you allow it to continue moving. Eventually, routines stop feeling temporary. They begin to feel permanent. Not because they were chosen permanently, but because they were never interrupted. People assume permanence happens through commitment, but permanence often happens through passive continuation, through not stopping, through not questioning, through not stepping outside long enough to see what's actually happening. And one day, without realizing when it happened, the temporary becomes familiar. The familiar becomes normal, and normal becomes identity. Not through intention, through repetition. There isn't always a moment when people decide who they become. Sometimes they simply notice who they've already become. And the most unsettling part isn't that it happened. It's that it happened quietly, without resistance, without awareness, without interruption. Because nothing ever forced them to stop and ask where they were going. Nothing forced them to examine whether their current direction was chosen or simply continued. Nothing demanded clarity, so clarity never arrived. Not because it was unavailable, but because nothing required it. And maybe that's what makes it difficult to notice. Because nothing ever felt like a decision. It just felt like life continuing, one ordinary day at a time. Until eventually, there was no clear memory of when it began.